simply because I can't think of a more interesting topic for our neighbor city than, we all go there when we're forced to cross the bridge or go overseas, which I know is kind of loathsome to a lot of people. But we do spend time in Jacksonville, and it was just fun to see a book come out that explores a whole different side of Jacksonville that we know nothing about. So a special welcome to Bill Delaney. And I guess to start out with, Bill, you come from a good long line of Delaneys in Jacksonville with a pretty rich family history. When did you first get interested in writing?
So I've pretty much always been interested in writing as long as I can remember. I used to, even before I could write, I would tell stories and my grandmother would write them down in shorthand and then type them out on a typewriter. It's back in the 80s when typewriters were a thing.
Yeah. They still are a thing to some people.
They still are. Yeah, I still have one.
But I take it that's not how you write any longer.
No, that isn't how I write any longer.
So your dad is John Delaney.
That's right.
So you were pretty much, if you're familiar with Jacksonville history, former mayor. And so you've been exposed to, I'm just kind of imagining the stories around your dinner table.
Yeah, so it was an interesting way to grow up. My dad, he was involved in politics for a long time. He was a prosecutor before that. He was mayor from 1995 to 2003, mayor of Jacksonville. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's really from him that I got kind of a deeper picture of the city, mm-hmm. and not only the city, but the wider area. For him, it was very important to kind of be a mayor for the entire city. Mm-hmm. And Jacksonville's an area where it's still, they call it like a city of sides. There's West Side and North Side and South Side and Arlington, and and they don't always jive. They don't always communicate. And so it's easy to kind of get in your little bubble and just stay there and never leave it. And
kind of like Amelia Island.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, kind of like, a lot of places are like that, but it really made me get out of my bubble, especially, I loved the city. I loved our region, and, I wanted to know more about it, but you can't do that without popping the bubble.
So when and how did it come about that you discovered your first secret place or weird place or whatever, or obscure place or whatever, however you want to define it?
Yeah, so it's actually one of them that's in this book, and it's one of my favorite stories. I had a friend. I grew up in Neptune Beach, one of the beaches on the on the coast. I had a friend who moved from there out to the Julington Creek area. And when he moved out there, at that time, this was the late 90s, there was a ghost light called the Ghost Light Road. It was then a dirt road, very long, at night it would get really dark. There was no lights. There was really nothing on it. And there was an effect that you could, when you drove out there, you would be driving along and then you'd see in the distance a single headlight approaching you. And it would never quite reach you before it vanished. And I saw it myself multiple times, and I'm not somebody that, readily believes in, ghosts and things like that, but I did see it. It was a real thing. And there was, of course, a story that went with it, and I loved that. And the story was that there had been a motorcyclist in the 50s who made his brother mad, and his brother strung a rope across the road, and if he had been obeying the speed limit, he would have just been knocked off, but he wasn't. So off with his head. And to this day, he goes back and forth, either in search of his head or trying to protect the road. I thought it was a really cool story. The ghost light, unfortunately, can't be seen anymore. Ever since there was a kind of a weird intersection there that looks like it was creating an optical illusion where cars would look like they were coming straight on at enough distance that it looked like one headlight before they'd turn and vanished behind the trees. So you can't see it anymore. But that's, I think, really, is my buddy Jeff Lang. That's really what like made me want to dig deeper into all these stories, because that was something people back in the 60s were going out and looking at the ghost light.
Mm.
And so it was like a really cool thing, but it was something that a lot of people where I lived, nobody knew about it.
Yeah. Cool. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit too about your background and your other ventures. And how many different things, well, you've got only 10 fingers, but how many pies do you have them in, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so let's see. My day job, I work in marketing at the University of North Florida. I'm also, I was a freelance writer, or I tried my hand in that. And about 6 years ago is when I really tried to make a serious go at it. And I was finding that a lot of the local publications, I really wanted to write stories, like this, stories or stories about history and culture and some longer form stuff. And a lot of the publications weren't publishing the kinds of stories that I wanted to really write. And so after I tried it a few times, finally I just said, well, if nobody else is going to do it, I'll do it myself. So I got together with a couple of friends. They had a website called moderncities.com. I pitched the idea of doing a website that would be dedicated specifically to Jacksonville and the surrounding area, so Fernandina and St. Augustine, history, culture, urban issues, that kind of thing. And so we launched it. It's called thejacksonmag.com. And it's been really successful. It's been a lot of fun to do. We have a partnership with WJCT. It's the local NPR station. Sure. So we do work with them. We do radio spots and live events, or we were doing live events. We haven't started doing them again since the pandemic. And then last year I had an opportunity, my wife and I, to become part of the ownership of a print magazine, Edible Northeast Florida magazine. Well, thank you. So it's if you don't know what it is, it's dedicated to kind of the restaurant and farming and food scene of Northeast Florida, stretches from here down to St. Augustine and out to Gainesville. And it's a really cool publication.
I think, as I told you, I only wish I had the marketing budget for the bookstore to be able to advertise it in that publication.
Yeah.
But, I think we ran one spot to introduce the bistro a long time ago, but it's a really beautifully and well done publication.
Thanks so much. That's, that one's been a ton of fun to work on too. It's totally different. When you get used to internet writing, you can write as long as you want. If you see you made a mistake somewhere, you can fix it and it's done immediately. And that's just not the case with print. With print, it's like, all right, I have to make this fit, or I got to cut something else.
But do you find even with internet writing that people have the attention span to read long articles?
We actually have. I mean, we try to do a mix. And, we're not usually going to like 4,000 or 10,000 words. But as far as, like the articles that we do, I mean, we find that the length doesn't really have that much to do with how much traction it gets. It's often the topic, like something that's kind of in everybody's minds will often do more, or something that's super evergreen, like historical stories that we do that really kind of, capture people's attention. Like they'll do better no matter how long they are.
Great. So that kind of pretty much keeps you busy. When did you start on Secret Jacksonville?
So right before the pandemic is when I signed the contract. It was before the shutdowns and everything. So unfortunately, that meant that a lot of the museums and stuff were closed. I couldn't get into them, at least then.
But how did that come about? Did someone approach you, or did you wind up pitching the idea to someone, or how did it work?
They approached me. The publisher is called Reedy Press. They're a small publisher located in St. Louis, and they do these kinds of local interest books. They have different ones that they do. At first, they were focused more in bigger cities. So there's books like 100 Things to Do in Chicago Before You Die, or like Restaurants of Austin. And they wanted to shift to do more, medium-sized cities. And they really thought there would be a market, just like there is in a bigger city, for that. But to do that, they need local authors. So they said, like, a local is going to know a lot more about these kind of things and make it, more authentic.
So did they just wind up surfing the internet to figure out who's writing about Jacksonville?
Yeah, they did. They said they narrowed it down to a couple of people. They called me, and I jumped at it.
We met Reedy Press because they published Amy West.
That's right.
Who is a Jacksonville author that we had up here maybe 2 years ago. And her book was 100 Things to Do in Jacksonville
That's right.
Before You Die. So it's
Yeah.
on the same vein.
Yeah, Amy's book is really great. You should get it, by the way. She was the first one in this region that they ever did, and it's successful enough. They wanted to try again with me.
So you're number 2.
So I'm number 2.
Okay. Well, there's something to be said for number 2.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll pass her in sales, so you become number 1.
Well,
So they approach you, talk about the concept of what they want, and then you just had to flesh it out.
yeah, that's right. They essentially they kind of said, we have kind of a formula for how these things work. Because obviously they have a page count that they want to keep. They said so about 84 to 86 stories of certain length. And we'll put in pictures. And the pictures will also kind of take up some space depending on what they are.
Yep.
But otherwise, they really gave me kind of a blank check to do it. Their idea initially had been just Jacksonville. And I said, well, I don't really think you can, I think I could do it. I could tell it, I could easily find that many spots. I was like, I don't think you can really capture the whole sense of what it's like to live in Jacksonville without going out a bit and doing Fernandina and St. Augustine and a bit to the west.
Well, I can tell you, every author's dream is to get a blank check.
Yeah.
So that would be really nice. So tell us about Secret Jacksonville. Tell us about what's in the book and some of your favorite stories, and
absolutely.
Go through your little slide thing if you'd like.
Sure thing. Yeah, so the slides here are just kind of a sample of a few of the things, including things that are here in Fernandina. I really wanted to make sure that we got a wide spectrum of stories to tell, and spaces that have all different kind of connections. And I really thought you can't do it without Fernandina. And so I'll start off with this is one that if you've been to Jacksonville on the south side, you may recognize. This is Sexy Rexy the dinosaur. He has a pretty amusing origin story. He was originally a mini golf course obstacle, a Goofy Golf.
Pretty imposing obstacle, I'd say.
Yeah, and really the obstacle was in his right arm. He used to have a little caveman that he'd lift up and down, and you would putt under it. And that was the entire obstacle. But the company had a bunch of these all over the southeast. There's another one in Jacksonville, in fact, on the west side. There's one in St. Petersburg. And a number of these obstacles still exist. Well, this one was located on Beach Boulevard. Because Rexy here was located right on the road, he became kind of a famous landmark. People would be like, all right, you go past the dinosaur. Well, when Goofy Golf closed, there was a kind of a cry of terror that he might be demolished along with the rest of the park. So finally, the developers said, all right, we're going to keep him as the mascot of our strip mall.
Okay.
And so he's now in the parking lot, or right in front of the parking lot of a strip mall on Beach Boulevard in Jacksonville, but he's still, an icon. He's like, people drive by him, and half the time they're like, what the hell is that thing doing here? And otherwise they're like, all right.
Have any of you seen that?
Is it east or west of 295?
I don't know. I can only judge by the dinosaur.
Okay.
It's funny.
No, I believe he is west of 295.
I can't, number of times that I've driven that stretch, I don't remember seeing him, but maybe just not paying attention. But you'd think that something like that's pretty noticeable.
Yeah, he gets he's one in Jacksonville. He's is well known to the point that I knew I wasn't going to be able to write this book and not include him. You know, people would call me out and be like, "Oh, you didn't include this. You know, this can't be a good book."
Huh. Well, it's interesting too that, you know, in this day and age, that you can have a landmark like that that's not seriously defaced with graffiti or anything like that, or how often they have to repaint him.
So they've repainted him since I took this picture. He does get periodically defaced,
Yeah.
and they have to maintain him. In fact, back in the early 2000s, when they were restoring him, they got engineering students from UNF to come out and restore him so that his eyes worked again, and so he was repainted and not falling apart. So they do that periodically. They did it so recently I wasn't able to get the picture of his new paint job in the book.
Well, if nothing else, if they get a dentist's office in the strip mall, that would be a perfect promotion.
Yeah, there's a billiard place behind it, and it used to be called T-Rex Billiards. It has a different name now, unfortunately. I don't know why you would, move away from the dinosaur, but they did.
Okay. What else you got?
This is one of my favorite stories. It's one of those things that everybody in town knows that shrimp is big here. A lot of people love shrimp. They love to get fresh ones. Everybody's got their favorite place, anybody that eats seafood anyway. What I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for is that Fernandina specifically, and the First Coast in general, is the birthplace of the modern shrimping industry. This was, for thousands of years, predating the United States, back in Native American times, people were catching shrimp. And they were essentially doing it by the same way, with a cast net, or by dragging what they call a seine net in the water between two boats. Well, up until the very early 20th century, that's how they were still catching shrimp here. Well, this is the first place that anybody ever thought to take a motorboat out. And it was a local shrimper. He realized there was too much competition, because on rowboats, you kind of have to stick into the near shore. He said, with a motorboat, I can go out farther. And what he found is there was way more shrimp out there. Because what it is the St. Johns River is a major breeding ground. So they breed in the river, they grow big and strong, and they swim out. And then they go north and south from there. Fernandina is right north of there. The Gulf Stream just carries them right up. So he found this really fertile, shrimp fishery it was just a little bit farther than anybody could reach before. Well, there was another innovation. A guy came down from New England, where he was using what they call an Otter Troll, which is a type of net that has a mouth, kind of a square, that's pulled behind a boat, and as it's dragged, fish and whatever critters get sucked into it and caught in the net in the back. And he was originally thinking that he was going to use it for fish. And when he ended up coming back, when he ended up hauling in the catch, he realized he was just catching so many shrimp. He's like, well, with a couple of adaptations, this will be the best way to catch shrimp. And so he tweaked the Otter Troll. This happened again here in Fernandina. And that is still the way that shrimp are caught today, over 100 years later, is using the process and the tools that were invented right here in Fernandina. And it wasn't only Fernandina. Mayport down in the Jacksonville area also became big. St. Augustine became a pretty sizable shrimp port. Mayport, to this point, you might have heard of Mayport shrimp. If you like seafood.
Safe harbor.
Yeah, Safe Harbor is, an incredible place. It's unfortunately the last remaining seafood, like offloading port in Mayport. There used to be more. There are plans to kind of restore it, but it's just such a cool, fascinating, and important part of our history that I don't think that we give ourselves enough credit for.
Well, a lot of people know the Burbank family from Fernandina Park, and I think he was the one who invented the net that is used for that purpose. And when we moved here in 2001, I guess, there was still one shrimp processing place left right on Front Street. a few doors up from where the Salty Pelican is on the opposite side. So it's very close to the mill entrance. And what I remember most about that place was either the smell or the number of cats that would gather around the front. They were no dummies. Between cats and pelicans,
yeah.
Boy, did they have plenty to eat. A lot of good food.
Yeah, they know the score.
Okay.
It's another Fernandina one.
Yep. That we're all familiar with.
Yep.
I would think.
The Egan's Creek Greenway. It's one of those things that's pretty famous in Fernandina. I expect everybody here knows what it is. But I was telling a story this morning. Yeah, I had heard of it. I hadn't really seen it before. And I had a friend that likes to go around and get out into nature and take pictures of plants and animals and things. And it was apparently an incredible trip where she saw like a turtle crossing over the path, and she saw like 6 or 7 alligators and all kinds of birds. And I was like, oh my God, this place is amazing. Where is this? And she said, it's the Egan's Creek Greenway. I was like, the Greenway that's like in the middle of Fernandina?
Yep.
And she's like, yeah, it's incredible. So I went up there. I published an article on it on the Jackson, and like she didn't want to tell me where it was. Like I asked her on Instagram, and so she sent me like a direct message. And after I wrote that, she sent me a message saying, "Oh, you're giving away all my secret spots." And I was like, "Well, that's kind of what I do." But it's one of those things, like I say, secrets are never secrets to everybody. Something that could be, like an arcane mystery to one person will be the common knowledge of somebody else. And I think Egan's Creek is one of those. I mean, I've seen people here that commute, like they ride their bikes up and down it because it's an easy way to get around, free of cars, and it's really pretty. But you just go outside of the city, and I don't think that enough people know about it. I think it's one of those things that any town would be jealous to have, wishing they had something like this or that they could. The story is cool. It's always been important to Fernandina history. It's where the town was originally located, right at the mouth. It was shut off in the 60s. They totally capped it off from the end to control flooding and mosquitoes and open up more land, and it ended up being a terrible mistake because it destroyed the ecology. Mm-hmm. And so since 2000, they've restored the tidal flow, and then all of a sudden, the birds are back. And the birds are back, and so the alligators are back. And all sorts of, fish are back, and turtles, and all kinds of things. It's a incredibly successful project, and it's something to my mind, I think it's one of the best public spaces that I know of.
Mm-hmm. Got some more about Jacksonville in here?
I do.
Good. Do
J.P. Small Memorial Park. This is something that even people in much of Jacksonville have no idea it's there. But it has a ton of history. It's in the Durkeeville neighborhood in northwest Jacksonville, which is an area that does not get nearly enough attention unless it's a story about crimes and drugs and things. But this is the only remaining historic baseball field in Jacksonville. Dates back to 1911. It was the city's main park for minor league baseball and spring training at that time until the 50s when they built one downtown. But its real claim to fame is it was the home of the Jacksonville Redcaps. They were a team in the Negro Major Leagues in the 1930s and 40s. It's back during the days of segregation in baseball, when black players were excluded from Major League Baseball. The Negro Leagues had talent that matched them. Mm-hmm. And a number of Negro Leagues players went on to the majors after Jackie Robinson broke the color line. Yeah. Well, the Redcaps were the only major league team in Florida at that time. They really were the first major leaguers. In Major League Baseball now recognizes the leagues as major leagues. So they were the first major league team in any sport in Florida history. And they played right there. In the 1950s, as after the major leagues had desegregated, in the South, the minor league teams still hadn't done it. In 1953, the Jacksonville Braves had a new owner that wasn't about to let segregation stand in his way of a championship. And so he jumped at the chance to bring in 3 black players from the Braves organization. And one of them was Hank Aaron, who just died recently, Hammerin' Hank. He broke Jacksonville's baseball color line. He immediately became the MVP of the league. He brought the team to the playoffs, whereas they hadn't been in the playoffs for many years before that. And again, that happened right there. It's still used. It's still in use. Edward Waters University and Stanton High School use it for baseball and softball. And now they've opened up a little museum inside it. It's the story of local baseball, which is, I've been in there once. We did a tour of it. It's really cool. It's in the middle of a kind of a cool neighborhood. And it's one of those things, though, that if you don't live in the neighborhood, most people have no idea it's there.
One of the weirder things about Jacksonville, in my opinion, is how in the world they would name a baseball team the Jumbo Shrimp, thinking that was going to intimidate an opponent.
Yeah. I think he wasn't going for intimidation. He was going to be memorable. And he knew it was something that was going to stick in people's minds. And, I hated it at first, but it's kind of grown on me.
Yeah, is it? Okay. I'm not quite there yet. I think the Suns was a little bit better, but that's another story.
Yeah. I definitely, I love the Suns.
Okay.
And this one, another one of my favorite spaces, Bulls Bay Preserve. It has a lot of history. It was the site of the slave plantation owned by the founder of Jacksonville, Isaiah D. Hart. It's located west of downtown. It's about 10 minutes away. You can literally see downtown Jacksonville, the skyline, from outside of this park. Well, after the Civil War, it was mostly kind of let go. They used it for logging, sand mining, and a few other things like that. It wasn't really developed. And then in 1999, when my father was mayor, he had a big push. It's called the Preservation Project. And he bought up 50,000 acres of land so that it wouldn't be developed. And it started with kind of ecologically sensitive lands. And this one was especially important because it's the headwaters of 2 different creeks, 6 Mile Creek and the Cedar River, tributaries of the St. Johns. And so that's why they bought it. But for 20 years, they couldn't build a park there. The city had always wanted to use it for a park and to cut trails in there. And they had a conflict with the St. Johns River Water Management District, and they could never agree on how to open it up safely as a park. And so finally, just 2 years ago, 2019, they finally found a way. They said, okay, we really are only going to put trails in the southern side of it. It's 1,200 acres, and that this is like 50 acres is all that's been developed. So they started trails and started opening up. Well, one of the trails goes by something that you can't find in much of Florida. That is an honest to God 4-foot tall waterfall. I say it like it's one of the most accessible waterfalls in all of Florida. Not that it has a lot of competition with that, but it's literally 10 minutes from downtown Jacksonville. And until 2019, almost nobody knew it was there. I talked to my dad when I was writing about this. He's the one that saved this land, and he didn't remember the waterfall was there. I don't know if he knew in the past and forgot, but I wasn't able to find any records about it. But there it is. It's something that's super remarkable. In Florida, there's not very many of these, and there's one within 10 minutes driving of a major city. And nobody knew until 2 years ago. And still, most people have no idea.
So if you can't wait to get to Niagara Falls, you can just get a quick fix 10 minutes from Jacksonville. Are there any remnants of the plantation?
There is nothing, to my knowledge, that's still there. No buildings or anything. There is almost certainly lots of archaeological evidence there, but to my knowledge, that it hasn't been explored thoroughly. They don't really even know the exact locations of the buildings.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, well, that's all I have in my PowerPoint here.
Okay.
You had one previously on Fernandina.
Oh, that's right. Old Town. So Fernandina is a city that moved.
Yep.
Its origins go back to 1811. I think that a lot of people in Fernandina are familiar with the area of Old Town, whether they know the story of it or not. But it's where the Spanish first platted out the town. And in fact, like the history goes back even farther than that. It was where the plantation that owned all of Amelia Island, that's where its headquarters were. So it was always the center of life. It's right south of the mouth of Egan's Creek on the Amelia River. And it was platted out. It was the last town to be platted out according to the laws of the Indies, which was the Spanish Empire's kind of, early version of building code. And it's where the whole town was based until the 1850s and 60s when the railroads came.
Yep.
And the railroads couldn't get through there. So they built the station a mile to the south, and that's where the town gravitated. But the streets are still up there. There's some of them still have the original names or English versions of them. There's a Ladies Street, which used to be the Damas Street.
But my sense of that history is that, like, because Fernandina was always a safe haven port for pirates, that dates back even to the 16th century. Far earlier. I don't know when Lady Street actually got its name and when the little domiciles and brothels started surfacing there. But it could date back far before the Spanish.
It could certainly date back farther than that. There was plans to build a settlement there when Lord Egmont owned the plantation, and it never really took off after he died. That was like 1770. And so even before that, there were decades and decades of people that lived in that area. And it was a haven for pirates. It was kind of Spain's last defense against the British colonies.
Well, one more story about Jacksonville. Tell us about the tombstone on the sidewalk.
The tombstone on the sidewalk. I don't have a picture of it, but in Durkeeville, Northwest Jacksonville neighborhood, not very far from where that baseball park is, there is in the middle of a sidewalk, just in front of a city park, tombstone. A man named Thompson Williams. And it says on it, it tells the story of why it was there. And it says that he endeavored to protect a white woman who was being attacked and was shot. And so the white citizens of Jacksonville came together and gave him, a great burial place. At that time, it wasn't a sidewalk there. It was a very well kept black cemetery. It was kind of the primary cemetery for the La Villa neighborhood to the south of it. And so it had this big tombstone with this message about it. Well, as the decades went on, the cemetery fell into disrepair. And the owners of the cemetery ceded it to the city, saying, well, it needs to either be a cemetery or a park. And the city was going to be paving through another park, another African-American park, and to build I-95. It was back in the 40s and 50s when that was being planned. And so they said, well, we need another one. We have this cemetery, we'll just put it there, we'll just move the tombstones out. Well, that was one that they didn't want to remove because it was huge. It's probably this big. But it's also, I think, the message that's on it. And so the cemetery was erased for a park. But the way they were gridding the streets, the tombstone they wanted to leave was still right in the middle of the sidewalk. So they just kind of built it around it. And it's a pretty big, nice park. But it's one of those stories it's a weird thing if you ever were to come across it, but it's also, it has a lot to say, I think, about the history of our community and the way that some of these decisions were made and to an extent are still made to just, kind of erase the legacy of the past.
How did you go about discovering some of these places?
So that's a good question. Many of them were things I had already I had already known about,
Hmm.
just kind of from around town, or I'd done research, talking to friends from different parts of town. Some of my partners at the Jackson knew a whole lot of this stuff. And other ones I just stumbled upon myself. Bulls Bay was one that I went there. I visited it shortly after it opened. I was just driving by there one day and I was like, Bulls Bay Preserve? I've never heard of that. What is that? It's got trails and everything. And then, oh my God, it's got a waterfall in it.
Yeah.
It's like, how has nobody ever written about this? Well, they hadn't written about it because it had just opened.
Yeah.
And they very quietly opened it. So that's the way that I discovered others of them. And some of the stories in the book are things I think that are pretty well known, but they have a story or a feature that is less known. And those are ones that I found, like just kind of doing research on, say, the Jacksonville Pier. I found like the impact that building the pier had on surfing taking off in popularity in Northeast Florida.
Mhm.
It's something I grew up at the beach. I never knew before I started doing research. So I guess you could say I came upon these things in a lot of different ways.
Mhm. Mhm. Questions? Anybody?
Do you do any tours based on your book?
I actually have 2 coming up based on the book through the Jackson. We also do tours in the kind of from October to about April. We usually do about one a month. It gets too hot after that to do too many. But I have one coming up on, I think, October 11th, and another one is in November. And those are going to be more focused on the sites that are in downtown Jacksonville, which I didn't talk a lot about them. But just to make it easier to walk, it's hard to do a tour of 86 places that are spread from Cumberland Island to St. Augustine.
Not if you have a bus
Yeah, maybe we could do a bus tour. That would be pretty fun.
or a little, yeah, that's another story.
How do you find out about the tour?
If you follow us on thejacksonmag.com, we advertise them there. We're also on Facebook. That's usually where we put our most current information about those kinds of things. So the walking tours will be released pretty shortly, the next probably 2 days or so.
Well, I think this is going to make a great addition to our guest room, for, not that we want people to stay longer than 3 days, but if they do and they want to get out and explore something other than the island, we can send them to Jacksonville with some favorite places. And to accompany this, I should let you know that we are publishing our own book that should be out in about 3 weeks, called An Insider's Guide to Amelia Island's Happy Places. That
Love
was
it.
developed by our staff, where everyone contributed an essay about their happy place, or one place that's special around this area. So we will have that available in time for the holidays as well. All right, anything else? Well, Bill, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, do you have an absolute favorite in the book, or one that you've kind of gone through over and over?
My favorite thing in the book, it's on the cover. I don't have a picture of it, but it's this owl statue. It's called the Hontoon Owl. That is a Native American wooden effigy. It was found in the St. Johns River in the 50s. It was preserved in the muck. It had been there for like 700 years. And it is it's the largest Native American wooden effigy that's ever been found in North America. And you can see it over at Fort Caroline. If you ever go out that way, in their visitor center, it's posted up in there.
How cool. I mean, I knew about the Native American history, but I didn't realize that they would have found something that I take it must have been some preservation and restoration involved with that.
Yes, they worked to preserve it. It looks like the bottom part of it had rotted, like it was a big tree trunk that was standing on the riverbank, and over the years it just rotted and fell into the river.
Yeah.
But when it fell into the river, it got covered in muck, and that saved it for hundreds of years. But it always makes me think, like, how much other stuff was like that didn't get preserved, that just totally rotted away. Like if the local Native Americans were capable of producing something that beautiful. Just what else has been totally lost?
Well, and I think about, the secrets that riverbeds hold between the slave trade here and Native American history, the artifacts that come up from that river bottom. But that takes a whole specialty in itself in terms of figuring out how to retrieve those things.
Yes, it does. I mean, there's stuff that goes down there, and we'll even have a good sense of where it is that doesn't get rediscovered for 100 years.
Yeah. Anybody? Okay. Well, Bill's going to be over autographing copies of the book if you'd like, and just take one. And if you don't have it already, you can just take it downstairs and check out at the cash wrap. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Our delight.